I first presented on MIGS a few years ago here at the OIS, and I entitled my session, as you see, MIGS is growing up. I think it's exciting to see where MIGS is going, and we're going to hear about what's happening in this space in the next few minutes here. These are my disclosures, and I'm very proud to have worked with all these companies from the very beginning, for many of these companies in this device development world. Now, just a few facts. I know glaucoma may not be the most sexy thing yet, but watch, you'll see it will. We know, of course, this is a wide-ranging disease, the first or second leading cause of blindness in the world. 60 million people afflicted, up to 80 million by the year 2020. When it comes to the numbers here, $6 billion in this space, of which 2.5 or so are in the United States. So there's a lot of money in this space. Of course, we know this often drives innovation, but it's been a while. And why is that? We've had a medication world, of course. Medications have been the mainstay. Adherence is the main problem, 50%, 60%, lack of adherence, lack of compliance, and of course, all the other side effects with glaucoma drops, including lack of efficacy. And of course, we have surgery in the other extreme, which of course is a fairly aggressive, invasive procedure that is not something that most patients or surgeons gravitate to. And this is why we've sort of come into this new phase of intervention, which I call interventional glaucoma, or MIGS, minimally or microinvasive glaucoma surgery. I think this is something I think that hopefully those of you that are around this space have become familiar with. This is very much like the role that coronary stents have played out. They've been a $1 billion industry, of course, when it comes to cardiovascular medicine. We define MIGS as ab interno approaches that are minimally traumatic, that are minimally invasive, have ultimate safety comparable to what we see in refractive and cataract surgery, and have a high efficiency in terms of in the OR. And one of the big outcome measures, of course, is not only lowering pressure, but from our patient's perspective, eliminating or reducing drops. That's a very important understanding of what the role of MIGS is. And just for those of you that are getting familiar with MIGS, it's useful to classify MIGS devices based on the outflow direction. For example, Schemm's canal and suprachoroidal devices are internal MIGS. They drain aqueous internally through the natural and through the non-conventional pathways. And then we have, of course, subconjunctival pathways, which generate some further IOP lowering, albeit with external filtration. We see an era of microstenting. We see 5 companies that we'll hear from here at different stages of development. I've been very fortunate to have worked with all these companies, having implanted at least 100 devices of each of these companies here, and I think they all have brought something to the table here. It's been interesting. We've seen over almost $500 million, by the way, invested into these companies in financing. We've also seen a company take a company to go public. We've seen 2 strategics acquire 2 MIGS companies, which I think is something a few years ago was something that we were all quite, we were dreaming of course, here. So I think things have really changed a lot here. We've seen an uptake of MIGS devices in the US, while we see a shrinking number of traditional glaucoma surgeries. This is a phenomenon that we continue to see. Glaukos has released some of their growth and sees strong growth year by year from when they were first released in 2013 up to the last fiscal year, showing significant growth year by year. But one question we have to ask is, how big is the market? What's the potential, and what's our current size of our market? And I think to understand the market in glaucoma and MIGS, it's important to understand the difference between the combo cataract patient, of which there are about 700,000 cases per year, and the standalone procedures, which is still a bit of a procedure that is still not quite developed yet, and still something that we need to further evaluate. So we'll be talking a bit about this as well. Of course, we know when it comes to combining cataract and glaucoma, being in the eye, of course, gives us an opportunity to treat glaucoma here. And this is where MIGS has really developed in the initial stages here. Now, when it comes to glaucoma surgeries, there are about 250,000 a year that are done, of which about 140,000 are traditional approaches. This is a relatively low number here, and something to consider, of course, when we think about what the expanse of MIGS may be in the future here. What is the glaucoma prevalence? This may give us an idea as far as how big the market is. Well, when we look at some of the prevalence data here in the US, 2% of patients over the age of 40 have glaucoma. And in terms of absolute numbers, in the current year, we're about 3 million patients in the US, living in the US, diagnosed with glaucoma, of which will double over the next 20 to 30 years. And again, remember, these are prevalence numbers per patient. Each patient has 2 eyes that need to be treated, of course. So when we think about the 3 million or so US glaucoma patients that exist in the US, we see a small number treated by lasers, about 500,000. We see a very small number treated with traditional operations like trabeculectomy and tubes. So there's a large treatment gap in terms of the available interventional approaches, and this is where MIGS has a potential, either combined or as a standalone procedure here. Now, when we think about what patient profiles may fit into MIGS, we think of patients, for example, that are in the TRAB group, patients that have had laser, patients that are on 2 or more medications. And if you add up all these numbers here, we have a significant number of patients here that potentially are MIGS candidates, especially when it comes to standalone procedures, both in the US and global as well. When we think about glaucoma severity, another way to look at in terms of patient profiles here, we see that there's a large number of patients at the early stage of glaucoma, while the advanced stage still has a significant number, albeit at a smaller rate. Another way to look at it is look at target IOP, and this really guides our therapy. We see that in terms of the US population, a large chunk of the population live in that early space, ocular hypertension and mild disease. While in the advanced stage, those are smaller numbers, but yet those patients really need maximal IOP lowering. This is a useful way to look at in terms of looking at safety versus efficacy, and of course in MIGS, it's all about safety here. One question we have is, what is the incidence? After all, if we continue to deplete the prevalence pool, what will the incidence be? We have to remember, glaucoma is a cycle, a chronic disease. So it's a lifelong therapy here that's required, and often retreatment is required. In other words, although not in terms of our patient perspective, this is really a procedure that requires multiple interventions over time. And there are probably about 200,000 or so newly diagnosed glaucoma patients per year that potentially may be eligible for MIGS procedures here. So how do we choose what procedure or what intervention to seek per patient? This is really a matter of looking at risk, reward, and effort. And although now current therapies are predicated on medication-heavy treatments, while surgery is typically reserved to the last resort, I think what we're seeing in the future is a world where drug delivery plays an important role in early glaucoma, and MIGS occupies a very important role in that middle phase, in that early, mild to moderate disease patient, whether it's combined with phaco or not. Certainly the future looks bright, and we look forward to the further presentations from our company presenters shortly. Thank you.